All right. Welcome, everyone. A small comment following everything we heard today about freedom of speech. I just wanted to remind that freedom of speech is not only about being heard, it's also about having the ability to listen. I'll move on to our panel today. So, in the early 2010s, the Arab Spring captured global attention as a turning point when social media seemed to promise more democratic and open world. But over the past decade, that promise has unraveled. The same platforms, once used for protest mobilization, are now tools for surveillance, disinformation, and political manipulation, used by authoritarian regimes and democracies alike. Earlier panels explored how algorithmic amplifications accelerates democratic decline, turning platforms of connection into engines of control. This panel asks, what happens when social media becomes an instrument of power? At the same time, journalism, the cornerstone of democratic discourse, is in retreat. Newsrooms are shrinking, the financial model has collapsed, and tech giants dominate both distribution and revenue. In many countries, journalists face not only economic pressure, but real fear. The power imbalance between platforms, press, and the public grows deeper. Today, in this panel, we turn our focus beyond the US and EU to Brazil, Israel, and Turkey. Three very different but revealing case studies. In each, social media plays a central role in shaping, distorting, and amplifying political life. This conversation is urgent, and it begins with the courage to name what's happening. On that note, I will pass on to our panelists to present themselves and share if they have any conflict of interest.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Judith. Thank you, the organization, for inviting me here. It's been a fantastic day, great discussions, so it's wonderful to participate here. And thank you, my fellow panelists, for the conversations we have previously to this panel. So I'm professor of law at FGV Law School in São Paulo, where I also coordinate the research nucleus and competition, public policy, innovation, and technology compete. Before I start my disclosure here, and one disclaimer. So my disclosure is that I'm also a practitioner, so my views may be influenced by my practice, which also involves digital platforms, including Google, Uber, and Airbnb, although I do not practice nor provide advice on the subject of my talk. I also disclose that I participated in a research project called Disinformation Observatory in 2022 elections, which received funding from a local NGO called Galo da Manhã that focuses on strengthening democratic institutions. And also, Meta has granted unconditional research funding to the Compete Research Nucleus at FGV Law School. And now my disclaimer here, that I'm not here to defend the Brazilian system. It certainly has lots of shortcomings, as any content intervention has. But I think it's worth trying to make sense of it and understanding what lessons we can draw from it, as it's really dynamic in a way that's dealing with disinformation in elections. So in my 7 minutes here that we agreed, I'll briefly address the Brazilian experience with disinformation in elections and trying to make a little sense of it. So I start with this image here. Some of you may have heard that last year, X was banned for about 6 weeks in Brazil. It was a big clash between X and our Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided to take down certain profiles and a few posts of X that allegedly was threatening the federal police in Brazil and the democratic institutions. X resisted and said, no, we're not going to implement this, and actually fired the legal representative in Brazil and said, we're not going to implement this. And then the Supreme Court imposed fines, daily fines on X, which kept not implementing it, decided to ban it, and ordered the telecommunications operator to coordinate with the telecommunications regulator to coordinate with the operators to block it. And that actually happened in Brazil in late August until October. In October, X backed down and implemented the orders and also paid the fines. After that, the Supreme Court released the blocking. So that's what happened. That's the type of clash that's happening in Brazil between platforms and courts. And why is that? How did we get to that point? That's what I like to do, and let me step back for that. So first of all, why Brazil matters? And I think it matters for a few reasons. First, it's big, seventh largest country in the world in population, 10th largest economy. Second, it's hyper-connected. More than 90% of the households have some connection with the internet. More than 100 million users in WhatsApp, more than 141 million users in Instagram, almost 100 million users in TikTok at this point, and more than 20 million users in X. So people like social media and are very engaged in social media in Brazil. It's also a young democracy. So in the past 40 years, we've been a democracy since 1985, after 20 years of dictatorship. So this is also part of our context there. And it has a very peculiar court system that's a court-based content regulation system, which is a real-time experiment for discussions on disinformation, misinformation, and all types of messy issues that come up in elections here, especially in election periods. So this system is put together for election periods, and it has approximately 3,000 judges and 3,000 prosecutors allocated to oversee fairness of elections. And they rule on discussions on fairness of elections during this period of elections. And this includes evaluating the veracity of different forms of political advertisement. So electoral courts enforce content-based regulation, is striking down content that fits in the legal standards of disinformation. And what are the legal standards here? So courts have the authority to strike down content that refers to facts, quote, known to be untrue, and or facts, quote, severely decontextualized. These are the legal standards at this point. Also, in the last elections, they acquired broader powers to deal with disinformation that may affect, quote, again, integrity of the electoral process. So information that, for instance, was challenging how the electronic polling was working with baseless arguments about how it could be rigged and so on and so forth. So this was the debate on the legal standards, as you know, very broad legal standards here. And of course, the system brings big challenges, many challenges, and I'll not have the chance to go through all of them in this presentation, but I'll just discuss two levels of challenges here. The first level, of course, with any content-based regulation here is deciding what content to strike down, what actually fits these legal standards that are so broad. So there are lots of difficulties here. It's a case-by-case ex post content moderation. So there's no previous analysis of any content. Content's published, and then it's brought to courts to take decisions about them. Who brings that? Political parties, candidates, prosecutors litigate about content here that they consider fake or untrue. There's a very large number of cases. So we did a research in the 2018 elections trying to filter and to actually see the full universe of decisions. We found more than 1,500 decisions dealing with online disinformation alone. Okay, so besides everything else that these courts were doing. So these are lots of decisions taken in 4 months, basically. But still, it's a scratch in the information environment, right? It's nothing if you think about the degree of information that's circulated in an election. And then finally, these decisions themselves, they become part of the information environment, of course. So they're debatable, right? So they're challenged by those that are being restricted. And they will say, well, it's censorship. The courts are really taking down content that they shouldn't. And those that are actually arguing for the untruthness, right, of this information will say, look, I was right. I mean, this information is baseless and it was out there. So this becomes part of the public debate and the political debate. A second level of challenge here is really that even if courts get it right, okay, so let's put a parenthesis here. I know that it's very debatable, but even if it get it right and say, look, this is really outrageous, baseless information that's not based on any fact, it's just creating lies, right? Enforcement is extremely difficult and dependent on the platforms. They depend on the platforms, and if you see here this big table, sorry, I was just moving here, not there. This big table is the Supreme Court justice sitting with all representatives of the platforms before the elections and trying to build direct channels of communication, saying, look, we're going to have these decisions, we're going to have to enforce it very quickly. That was the key issue here in coordination. And of course, potential clashes come up as well as an X clash and also a Telegram clash. There was Telegram was refusing to appoint a representative in Brazil, and so it was threatened to be banned as well. And then it appointed a representative in Brazil there. So what happens here, and what are the potential good points and the potential weaknesses or shortcomings of this model? Of course, one big potential shortcoming is dealing with content itself. As we saw in the previous panels, this is always challenging, always difficult, and this is what the courts are trying to do in real time. Yet, this is a system that's open to multiple parties. It has expedited decisions, so decisions are taken between 24 to 72 hours by judges. Rulings are public and appellable. Courts are used to balance fairness of election and freedom of speech. I mean, they did that in a world previous to the internet, and this was part of the discussion, the debate with broadcast media, for instance. It's insulated from the party in power, so this is not the government. It's not the party in power that is taking these decisions. And the takedown orders are temporary during the elections only, and they're lifted after the elections. So this is how the system works. What are the shortcomings or weaknesses here that we see? The distinction between facts and opinions, of course, gets blurred in polarized contexts. It's extremely charged during the elections. The open-ended standards that I mentioned lead to a lack of coherence in precedents. So many times you see precedents that don't fit together and decisions that don't fit together. Expedite time frames generate superficial decisions, which is clear that if a judge has 24 hours to decide, it's going to be very superficial the way they react. The willingness and capacity to litigate influence the outcome. So those that are willing to challenge the most in court will probably get more decisions taking down content. So it becomes a race to invest in this litigation. And monitoring is costly and inherently limited. So there's clearly a scalability issue here as well. And one additional point is that there's a slippery slope here. I mean, once courts get into this direction, I mean, depending on how courts can be skewed in one direction or another, it could lead to negative outcomes as well. So let me pause here before the discussion and hear my fellow panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ido.
Thank you. Can I have
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. Am I moving backwards or forward? I can't see. Okay. Thanks. I'm Ido Baum. I'm a professor of law and economics in the College of Management in Israel. I'm also the academic director of the Louis Brandeis Institute for Society, Economy, and Democracy in Israel. And I'm going to talk about the situation in Israel using a bunch of research projects that we're working on. In terms of disclosure, I'm also the in-house legal commentator of the financial newspaper from the Haaretz group. It's called The Marker. I've done that for many years. I've been a journalist for many years, aside from my academic position. Okay, so I guess we're starting from a very high point at the moment because we've had all the discussions today. And I guess what was interesting for me over the lunch discussion, Tom Ginsburg mentioned that the U.S. is exporting social media platforms to other countries, and in a way it's exporting First Amendment as well, and Section 230 as well. And I think what we're seeing is that in our countries, we need to deal with the consequences of this product that we're getting. Israel is experiencing a democratic backslide. If you're following Hungary, Poland, Israel, then you see more or less the same playbook being played. Now with the Trump administration, I guess you can see a lot of similarities. I'll touch on that in a minute. Okay, so things that you need to know about Israel. Since 2023, Benjamin Netanyahu has returned as prime minister, returned to power with a right-wing, uh, I would say, some would say, illiberal coalition. And all in all, I think he's been in power for 13 years on and off in the last 25 years. The current government is immediately actually started with a wave of private legislation that was rushed through the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. What you can see here is actually the first 4 months of private legislation in coalitions over the last 50 years. And you can see the surge in the current coalition in 2023. I would argue that this is the equivalent of executive orders in the United States with what President Trump called historic speed. But this was 2 years before Trump. Poland has a similar graph, actually, if you look at what happened there. So you could say that immediately as the current government came to power, the government started changing the political, the governmental system in Israel. Other things that you need to know, since October 7th and the Hamas attack on Israel, Israel is at war, still is at war on several fronts. Currently, 59 hostages are still being held in Gaza. Approximately 20 are presumed to be still alive, and negotiations between Israel, Hamas, with American broker is going on. There's a judicial overhaul that's going on with strong public opposition during this process, and social media is a very important battleground in this context. Okay, why is Israel unique in terms of we're looking at the things that we're looking at? Okay, so first of all, Israel is highly divided. Israeli society is highly divided, and it is under real existential threat. There's a very high usage of media platforms in Israel. There's a very young population, so most young people are getting their news not from legacy media anymore, but from the platforms, from the various platforms that they're using. The intense crisis, the war means that a lot of people need information. They need it all the time. They want to know what's going on, and they search for this information on social media, and they get it from friends. They get it from the platforms through peer-to-peer or other platforms. Additionally, Israel is a key battleground for foreign influence campaigns conducted by the Russians, by the Chinese. A lot of them are conducted by the Iranians. With our experts that we work with at the Brandeis Institute, detected dozens of foreign information influence campaigns over the last few years on various issues, basically trying to polarize Israeli society, regardless of what the topic is. Plus, during the war, there was a record, unprecedented number of spies, including Israelis, spying for Iran. Usually they were recruited over Facebook and then activated on other platforms such as WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram. And this was so unusual that the Economist devoted a whole piece for this event. By the way, the Israeli government is also conducting campaigns, the current government campaigns of manipulation of public opinions. That explains perhaps why there are no serious legal measures taken to control the information space in Israel, not even on issues that have to do with national security. Instead, what we see is that the government just goes to the platforms voluntarily, asking them to take down information, including information that has to do with national security, with the war, with Meta mostly complying, and X and TikTok with the lowest rates of compliance. Okay, so this is more or less the background of what's actually going on in Israel in terms of the scene of the political and democratic scene. What I would like to point out here is that in the situation of a democratic backslide, what you don't see usually is a complete takeover of the information space with censorship, like you see in China or in North Korea or Iran. So, what the government needs to do in order to control the media space is basically control the media, and so what we can see the government doing is manipulating public opinion through the use of social media platforms. But it started beforehand. So I want to show you data. I'm very short-sighted, so I hope you could see this, right? Yeah, not this one. Here. This is data from 2022. What you could see here is data that we collected about the beneficial owners of legacy media, all major legacy media groups in Israel. And what you could see that at the time, with the help of Netanyahu and with Netanyahu's great happiness, almost all media organizations in Israel were owned by beneficial owners that had non-media economic interests that were significantly larger in the valuation compared to the value of their media group. The ones that are in red are media groups where we actually know, we have actual evidence that the beneficial owners intervened and corrupted media reporting. Now, the interesting thing is not only that almost all media groups in Israel were controlled by beneficial owners that had significant other economic interests, but when we looked at the regulatory interests of their non-media business, we could see. You could see it here. Everything in red means that there are media owners that are supposed to be competitors, but actually have the same regulatory interests vis-a-vis the government. So basically, this was a way for Benjamin Netanyahu to induce compliance from legacy media until the early 2020s. At the same time, Netanyahu always tried to introduce new owners to the legacy media, owners that had the same ideology as his government. What we can see later is that at a certain point, Netanyahu moved to social media platforms. He did not have to get rid of all the former beneficial owners of legacy media, but introduced. First, it was a newspaper owned by Sheldon Adelson. That was at the early 2010s. But then that became less important. He introduced Channel 14, owned by a media tycoon called Milishvili. That's more or less the Israeli version of Fox News. And this channel is used to produce a lot of content on social media platforms that is pushed forward by bots, by various trolls, and basically it captures a lot of the information space and drowns out anything that is pro Netanyahu. Now let me finish this introduction by showing you a really short video clip by Netanyahu, just from I could have chosen from any time, but this is just from 2 weeks ago. It's basically Netanyahu's version of that press conference where Elon Musk and President Trump were talking together, and Elon Musk was explaining that if public administration makes the decisions, then you're living in a bureaucracy, not in a democracy. Now, I remind you that Israel is at war. There is a hostage situation, and Netanyahu, I hope you'll be able to see this. I'll just show you. It's in Hebrew, but you'll get the drift in 10 seconds. Right? Is it? Right. So he just starts saying, okay, there is deep state in Israel. That's a public administration. They're left-wing, left-leaning. We're an elected right-wing government. What they want me is to be this plant, right? They want to make the decisions. And then he goes on over about 70 seconds in a very funny video clip to explain that public administration in Israel should not be trusted. And this went viral, of course. It goes on to Netanyahu's own Twitter account, X account, which has more than 500,000 followers, and then to his entire machine of propaganda, and becomes a very viral tool of influence. I'll stop here, and then we can go back to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ido. Afsin, how are things in Turkey?
Oh, I have a lot to tell you about that. Hi, everyone. Glad to be the last speaker of the last panel of the day. And many thanks to all our panelists, to the University of Chicago, to Stiegler Center for having me back. I say back because I had the pleasure and the honor to be a Stiegler Fellow last year. I'm an independent journalist. I was a news anchor in one of Turkey's largest private news networks for a decade until end of September 2023. And since then, I've been working as an independent freelance journalist. Disclaimer, and well, I guess it serves as a disclaimer. I now am not affiliated with any news organization, but I do contribute to independent Turkish news outlets, mostly digital, those such as BBC's Turkish edition and others that are based nationally. So that being said, I would like to use my 7 minutes. And as a journalist, I'm without slides, so I guess that's just how we roll. I would like to first share a brief overview of the Turkish context with you, and then focus on 3 main points in the interest of time. So the Turkish context, first I'll give you some numbers. It's a country, the population is 87 million, median age 33. It's a very connected society. I'll tell you more about it. Internet penetration is about 88%. Over 75 million internet users in the country. As of early this year, nearly 56 million people aged 18 and over were active on social media. And it is one of the countries that loves X, loves social media. We're in the top 10 when it comes to countries that use X. I believe we're the 7th. And WhatsApp use, Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms are also very popular. So it's a very young, like Brazil in that sense, young and hyper-connected society where the digital realm is also deeply polarized and deeply political. And I'd like to articulate that, focusing on 3 main moments in the last decade or so, and why I chose them when it comes to explaining what kind of battleground we're talking about. So much of the discussion when we were also preparing for this session was about what is the use of social media. Is it helpful to expand freedom of expression, or does it restrict? Please keep in mind that the debate that is being held in this country, we're hearing echoes as international scholars and journalists. There are lots of similarities, so it's not a far-flung context we're talking about. Social media is very much a battleground, very much a dual arena in Turkey. It is useful and essential for dissemination of information, to mobilize dissent, for independent journalism. But at the same time, it is also the place where rampant disinformation circulates, where you have echo chambers, and it's hard to have an objective, fair, balanced discussion about national events. And it is also a place where surveillance has become more sophisticated thanks to the availability of digital tools. 3 key moments in the last decade or so where we saw the role of social media evolving in Turkey. Number one, 2013 Gezi protests. It started as an environmental sit-in at the heart of Istanbul. You might remember this was following Arab uprisings in the entire Middle East and North Africa region. That's why the international media was looking at Turkey, or is Turkey next? Turkey next. It started as an environmental sit-in, but turned into a national protest. That was a time, I guess for the first time in near history, where social media was used widely by protesters to mobilize, to disseminate content, organize protests. And for the government, too, at the time, it was a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call in the sense that this is not just a social tool, but it is also an important arena for political influence. Moving forward, the second point from near history that I will mention is 2016. That is when the Turkish government, Turkey, survived a bloody coup attempt. There we saw the trend being flipped, by which I mean this time it was President Erdogan himself who joined a nightly news broadcast, famously via FaceTime video, asking his supporters, asking not just his supporters, everyone who stands against coups, because Turkey has a history of coups, not necessarily voters of his party, but everyone who was in principle standing against it, to take to streets. Not to stay at home, but take to streets and stop coup plotters. So this time he was the one who was rallying people to go out to the streets. There we saw a very different use of social media than 2013 Gezi protests. It was the government asking citizens to go out and stop the coup. And after that traumatic event, we see now in retrospect, it's becoming more clear that the state moved to consolidate digital power. And I will tell you more about the pieces of legislation that passed recently, which speaks to that moment. Finally, 2025, just a couple of weeks ago, this is going back to Judith's question, what is happening in Turkey? March 19th is when protests began again in Istanbul after the arrest of the mayor, who is also Erdogan's top contender in the next election cycle for presidency. It started in Istanbul, but spread to the rest of the country. It's mostly Gen Z driven. It's powered by Instagram, X, TikTok, and other social media platforms. How were they used? Well, viral images spread on these platforms. Viral images of solidarity or brutal crackdowns, or in certain circumstances, police being in solidarity with the protesters. So we saw all of that on social media. It was very, very instrumental in the last couple of weeks. But we also saw the government, the authorities responding with reducing internet bandwidth during peak hours of protests, restricting access to this kind of footage or images or information regarding the protests. And the 2022 disinformation law, which I will shortly tell you more about, was most of the time the basis for these kinds of actions. And detention of participants to protests and everything else followed. So the reason I mentioned these three moments, 2013, 2016, and most recently the protests in Istanbul, so that's 2025 March, is because these moments show that social media in Turkey is not just a social tool anymore, but it is a space, it's a terrain of struggle in a way. It's a space where citizens, state, and platforms are constantly negotiating and renegotiating what legal boundaries are, legal and political boundaries are. So that is the function of social media in Turkey, which is why I want to refer to three main points to give you a sense of what the country has been through. The second big point I want to make is about regulation of social media in Turkey and beyond. It is a contentious issue in Turkey, like the rest of the world. Two major pieces of legislation that I will mention. Number one, the 2020 social media law, as it is informally called. That law requires platforms to have physical representatives in the country. Before that, they did not have. And appointing local representatives mattered because the government or authorities couldn't find anybody to talk to directly when it came to certain requests, take down requests, or use or store user data in Turkey, or comply with other content requests. So that was an important step that was taken with that law. Authorities at the time framed this as a necessity for digital sovereignty and platform accountability. However, critics warned it gave the state vast powers when it came to moderating online speech. Second piece of legislation, which was more controversial in a sense, 2022 disinformation law, again, as it is informally called. The disinformation law, it really prompted a big national debate in the country because it criminalizes the spread of fake information, fake news and disinformation. By the way, yes, disinformation is rampant in Turkey because we all know, thanks to growing literature and scholarship, that in deeply polarized societies, disinformation circulates faster and is more effective, and Turkey is a perfect example of that. So yes, disinformation is an issue, but what is the right way to tackle it is still an important big question. So the law itself criminalizes spread of disinformation, spread of false information that could incite public panic. And there are prison terms that could be applied when individuals who are involved in these activities are found and arrested, if need be, according to law enforcement. So it also expanded Turkey's official media regulators' powers, and it also includes now the digital space. In the past, it was mostly mainstream news outlets, radio, television, newspapers. Now it's also the digital space. The problem with this was, and critics rightly argued, is who decides what is disinformation and what is not disinformation. So again, in a very polarized place where, according to your political perspectives, you could have different understandings of what truth is and isn't, determining what disinformation is also not a very easy task. It introduces a very dangerous ambiguity to the whole debate, especially when it comes to, say, criticizing the government about disaster response, or with a very high cost of living crisis in the country, how about inflation statistics? Do you rely on what the government says? Do you rely on what independent academics say? Who decides what is disinformation? So that's why this continues to be a contentious topic, and the disinformation law continues to be one piece of legislation that's still being debated. I wanted to bring up these different pieces of legislation to give you an example about how regulating online speech is very much an issue in the West and in non-Western contexts as well. So that's one thing to keep in mind. That brings me to my last point, which is about big tech and the dilemma of free expression. Just take X, a very quick example, which also ties again to Judith's question about Istanbul protests. It has been very instrumental. X has been very instrumental in recent wave of protests. I played a key role organizing the protesters and rallying around certain hashtags and creating and disseminating viral images, moments of solidarity, moments of violent crackdowns, all of that. It did circulate on X. But we know through the public statements by X, Global Government Affairs, that the Turkish government requested the takedown of about 700 accounts, including some of them included women's rights organizations or student organizations, journalists, other civil society entities. As far as we know from the public statement, X also made a statement saying that they were siding with free speech, so they were supportive of free speech. But de facto, we also see that certain accounts are suspended. Their viewability is restricted in Turkey, but still accessible abroad. So there is the ambiguity there about what was publicly said and what we see in practice. And in protest, a lot of users are now migrating to Blue Sky just to protest Musk's X in Turkey. So this is a question about whether platforms protect speech or restrict it, especially when they're faced with legal pressures in the national context in which they operate. I guess it's both, and Turkey is an example of that. Same goes for Google News. I can articulate in the next rounds of the discussion, but independent digital outlets are very important in terms of breathing oxygen into the Turkish information ecosystem, because due to pressures on press freedoms and financial and political pressures newsrooms have been dealing with, a lot of journalists are now operating in the online space. YouTube channels, digital news websites they have an important followership as well. But with the algorithms and the opaqueness of it, their revenue and their reach is very much affected by the decisions. So it continues to be another problem when it comes to access to news and dissemination of information in the country. I guess I ran out of time, but one final thought, if you allow me.
Of course.
And I was dying to say this. It's just based on my experience working as a journalist and covering international news. That was my beat for nearly 2 decades. There is a tendency to exoticize, fight for democracy, and fight for fair standards in non-Western contexts. I do hope we drop that. And I'm so thankful to Stiegler because we have this space to have a better and more frank conversation about the fact that we're actually all in the same fight. The contexts are different, the actors are different, the stories are different. Yes, some democracies have issues more than other democracies, but still at the same fight. So I do hope that this conversation and conversations such as this allows us to explore that commonality better because it's actually about protecting freedom and protecting truth at the same time. I'll stop here. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Afsin. Actually, I wanted to ask you, Ido, as I know in the past few years we see a lot of protests in Israel as well. What do you feel the share of social media in it, and do you share the same views as Afsin?
So I'm really skeptical about social media platforms as a tool for meaningful dissent, aside from actually injecting some dissenting voices into the information space. I guess serious protests have to happen on the ground, and we know that from Arab Spring that social media platforms can be a tool for getting people out, for having them take part in protests. But I'm still, and I'm reading a lot of research that has been done on this, and I'm still not convinced that, at least at the moment, social media platforms are a meaningful tool for getting people to successfully engage with declining democracies or autocracies and actually achieving a meaningful changing protest. Maybe I'll be proven wrong in the case of Turkey, but I think when you are part of the dissent, then you're probably in your echo chamber, thinking that there is a voice for dissent and that it actually matters. Now, people do go out, but when you're in an autocracy, then the government is surveilling everything that you're doing. The police is going to wait for the protesters when they arrive, and they will know exactly what kind of protest it's going to be and how powerful it's going to be and what kind of force they need to be prepared with in order to stop the protest as it is. In a way, when I look, that's now my optimistic side. I'm looking at Israel compared to other countries, and in Israel we've been able to stave off the democratic backslide, not 100%, but over the last 2 years, it took longer than it took Viktor Orban in Hungary and the Polish law and justice. And one of the reasons, I think, is the ongoing weekly protests in Israel, sometimes daily protests in Israel. First of all, Israel is a small country, so it's easier to protest. If you're living in Chicago and you want to protest in DC, it's a problem. In Israel, you just drive for half an hour and you're surrounding the parliament. But the other thing is the fact that there is no surveillance of what the protesters are doing. Over the last 10 days, Netanyahu is engaged in a judicial battle to oust the head of the Israeli internal security services, the Shabak. And it turns out, this guy and his predecessors all came out and revealed that Netanyahu asked them to use it's like the Israeli FBI, right? To use the powers of this organization to follow the protests, and they all refuse because they are all civil service people with the ethics of civil service that is not supposed to be politicized, and this is probably one of the reasons Netanyahu is trying to get rid of the current head of the service. And if he does, I think you will see the chilling effect that some of you are feeling now in the United States, the kind of chilling effect that people are afraid of because they know if they go online, if you use use WhatsApp to go to the streets, the government will know who they are and may retaliate in the future. So I'm kind of skeptical, and I think what we need to think about is not how to use social media as a power of dissent as they are now, but rather to clean to clean the way to as Barry Lynn said today, we need to induce anti-discrimination measures so that all voices get the same chances, not only dissenting voices,
Thank you so much, Ido.
anti-dissenting voices.
Caio, earlier on when you started to speak, you mentioned about Brazil's latest move, and Brazil's one of the first democracies to take on tech giants in a serious way. Most recently with the temporary suspension of X, assessing its sovereignty. I wanted to ask you if you think it was an effective move, and also I wanted to ask you if you think it's a model for other countries seeking to assert their digital sovereignty.
Thank you, Judith. So I do think it was effective in that particular circumstance, in the sense that Supreme Court issued a decision, X did not comply, the ban kicked in, X actually backed down and complied with it. So it showed at least that Brazil was relevant enough for X that it would comply with that decision. So it was effective as a way of implementing that particular decision. Regarding the model of dealing with disinformation in elections, I think it's very messy and certainly not, I think, my first suggestion to any other country. I mean, I think it should have made a disclaimer of like, don't take it at home, don't try to do it at home, right? Because it's super complicated. I think we're in a slippery slope. It's difficult to implement these standards. Although I do think that having independent courts coming to this discussion, right, and openly discussing what's the impact of certain contents on the fairness of elections, I do think that this brings lots of insights to the discussion. So even though if you don't buy the model in the sense that, well, we should have courts doing it, it's costly, it's difficult, it's still, I think, a major and important experiment for us to understand what's really happening. I mean, so things like repeated offenders, right? Disinformation that's coming from the same sources, the ways that this information is organized, the ways that the court learned that some types of disinformation during elections, for instance, challenging the integrity of elections themselves, is particularly harmful, right? Because then groups are opening up the possibility of actually challenging the elections themselves. And that became part of the debate. By bringing that from the Supreme Court, that becomes part of the debate, whether challenging whether the electronic ballots are working or not without any factual base for that, if that's reasonable, right?
It also echoes what has happened in the United States in that term.
Exactly, to a certain extent. But the wholesale model, I don't think that's really a replicable or the best option. I do think, and I think it was Elisa Cooper that mentioned earlier today, that moving up on the scale, right, and going upstream more to the design solutions than to content regulations, probably where we could build better solutions in general. Said that, we discussed the DSA today as well, right? I mean, it was enacted in 2022. We're in 2025. We don't even know if it has any impact so far. And we would go through 2 presidential elections discussing these types of issues in Brazil. So it's messy as well. It's not easy to go up the scale, I think, on this. So I do prefer uh, design solutions, and I think non-content intervention is usually better. So transparency, using trusted flaggers as in the DSA, and all these types of solutions that will somehow address the spread of disinformation. But I do think that what the Brazilian model brings is an honest, independent discussion about what type of disinformation is impacting fairness of elections. And I think that's relevant. I think just saying that let's not talk about this because it's content issue, I think that doesn't work. And I think we need to have this type of conversation, and it's urgent. So that's my view here, Judith.
Thank
If
you.
I just may say, design solutions are great, but we don't want them to be done by non-democratic regimes. And some countries just don't have the time to wait for the results of research on the DSA in terms of their democratic backslide, right?
Absolutely. I'm getting signs here that we need to move to Q&A. And I've noticed we have Stefano in the audience. Maybe you can tell us about what's happening in Italy.
Thank you. I don't know where we are in terms of democratic backsliding, but I'm curious about your experience as well, because in Italy, basically, we have a government and the prime minister, she stopped having press conferences with journalists, and she uses only digital platforms to communicate with the general audience. And the surprising development was that the owner of one of these platforms, Elon Musk, became a major player in Italian politics, which is quite surprising because he's quite a busy guy, but he has time to interfere almost not daily, but weekly in Italian politics. And basically, he became close friend of Giorgia Meloni, the prime minister, and then very close friend. I mean, maybe too close friend. And then he became a supporter of the other leader of the center-right coalition, Matteo Salvini, who is maybe the far right we have in Italy. I mean, we have different nuances of far right, but he's one of the far right we have in Italy. And he spoke at the Congress of his party supporting his leadership. And what is most surprising, Elon Musk basically challenges the authority of the president of the Republic in Italy, which is something that nobody has ever dared to do, because the president of the Republic is the most popular person in Italy. And he has repeatedly, I mean, at least in 3 occasions, challenged directly him. So I don't know how to deal with that, but journalists are totally disenfranchised in this situation because they are supposed to comment what happened on digital platforms and what Elon Musk does, and we have no direct access to Elon Musk. There is a strange guy who pretend to be the representative of Elon Musk in Italy, and he's something between a hacker and whatever, and he's indicted for corruption. So that's the situation. So I don't know how to react to this, but I was curious, for example, what happened in Brazil, because we mentioned the clash between Elon Musk and a judge, basically a single person, and what happened to the political landscape, how the government reacted to this, because Elon Musk was not happy of Lula's government, but what happened? Because in Italy, the problem is that we have Elon Musk, the government, and nothing else in between. And journalists are totally, I mean, we watch what is happening. It's quite fun, quite scaring, but we cannot have any direct role in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano.
Yeah, I can react to that. So I think here we have the Supreme Court, right, and have a justice of the Supreme Court in this clash with Elon Musk. And of course, there's also these sympathies going around, right? So to a certain extent, of course, there is the business model of the platforms, but to a certain extent, there is these relationships going on as well. And of course, Elon Musk was alleging that X was being censored because it was related to far-right discourse. So it associated this with an ideological view. The government actually pretty much watched here and implemented the decision when the ban was taken, right? So the Anatel, the telecommunications operator, was the one that coordinated the ban with the telecom operators. So the government didn't really get engaged in this particular discussion. But then you have the follow-on on this, which is, I mean, you have recent, I think it was February, that Truth Social and Rumble actually sued this Supreme Court justice, saying that was abridging or trying to abridge the freedom of speech of Americans. So there is a lawsuit against the person of the Supreme Court Justice of Brazil in Florida, I believe, going on here. And this was exactly in the same day that Bolsonaro was indicted for being part of the coup in Brazil, or the attempt coup in January 8th. So it was kind of like the symbolic reaction to what was going on. And it was indicted before the Supreme Court as well. So I do think that there is this broader relationships at the ideological level that's going on as well with the platforms. And I do think that courts are playing an important role in the Brazilian system. With all the difficulties, with all the complexities of dealing with content, but still standing up to like being in the middle of these relationships and saying, look, we need to have some view over how this is going to impact democracy. And Brazil was really close to a very big backlash, right? I mean, we had this attempt coup in January, and then there was this investigation that really found out deep involvement of the president and its aides and in the whole issue. And it's now on trial, in a criminal trial before the Supreme Court. So that's where we are at this point with all these relationships in the middle of it. So I think that's what we're seeing.
Thank you, Caio. I see we have more questions here.
Yeah, my name is Tim Wu, and I'm interested in the history of propaganda and censorship. And I want to ask a question about Israel, and it's sort of more a question about the playbook, but I want to see if I've got this right. So if I've got it right, the government or the ruling party is less interested in using sort of classic, what you might call classic censorship, which is where you ban certain forms of information and imprison the people, and more interested in voluntary, I guess, first of all, some voluntary restraints, but then also sort of flooding the zone with propaganda and taking advantage of maybe more of scarcity of attention than other things, to try to make sure that all information is out there and reaches everyone. I want to see if that's right. And is it right then that, in a sense, that free expression principles are important to protect the propaganda mechanism? In other words, so that there aren't ways of, trying to control propaganda techniques. I don't know if that question makes sense to you or not. But in other words, does the government have a sort of free expression approach that goes along with the propaganda approach? And is this description correct?
I don't think the government has any. There are legal mechanisms to deal with propaganda, if that's what.
Maybe my question hasn't got.
But it is, Israel is similar to the situation with Maloney, in that sense that there is no interaction anymore for the government with legacy media. So you don't have accountability anymore, right? You're just talking and propagandizing your position as prime minister directly to your voters, your audience. By the way, Netanyahu only interviews to Channel 14, the Israeli Fox News, and 2 years ago he was still interviewing with U.S. media. But U.S. journalists started asking tough questions. They did their job, so he stopped that, and now he's only using.
Maybe I have another question. How does he, if he does, make sure that his content is reached more, the population than rival content? Is there some method to do
bots, trolls, and sock puppets?
I don't want to dominate.
So Netanyahu has in Israel what is known as the poison machine. Okay, he's the only politician that have a poison machine. We don't know who is financing it, but one thing is for sure, he controls social media. So when you look at his social media activity, you see that there are tons of bots and avatars and sock puppet. Everything is coordinated. You can see how they work, and they dominate the space. It's on TikTok, it's on X, it's on it's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, and recently it's moved also to Telegram. None of his rivals in Israeli politics get close even to have 5% of the traction that he has on social media. And in many ways now the entire media landscape is dominated by two players, which is one is social media and what we call the poison machine. Now the poison machine is very effective in doing one thing. If you are emerging as someone that challenges Netanyahu, and it doesn't matter if you're a politician or a journalist or a civil society person, you know that the army of trolls and bots and sock puppets are going after you, and they will find something in your history, and they will humiliate you, and a lot of people just want to stay away. Now, going back to Dr. Baum's research, the only legacy media in Israel which is still has traction is the TV channel. And that TV channel, like Ido showed us, is owned by the Coca-Cola monopoly in Israel, which is also, it's a very big business that is, any moment, regulators can reign its power. So they play a game that sometimes they look very adversarial, but everybody understands that they are adversarial to one point, and some of his Netanyahu's sock puppets are very much present in all the TV broadcasts.
If I can just respond as well here, this seems very close to the description that the media in Brazil had to what was called the hate office, which was like this office right by the president in the presidential palace, allegedly run by his son, that would coordinate social media in a very aggressive way with bots and the whole ecosystem there. So, and this was really mapped by media in different articles, and very effectively, and much more effectively on the right wing side than any other player in the discussion. And then we're seeing that even after Bolsonaro left power, how the right wing kept organized in a way that reaches much further. So let me just give you one example. We had a couple months ago or a month and a half ago, this congressman in Brazil who is 28 years old, the most voted congressman last election, 1.5 million votes. He had a post that is basically disinformation about a new policy of the government to monitor instant payment. Okay, just in a way that monitors other financial transactions. Now it would monitor instant payment in a certain way, like other financial transactions. And then suddenly this guy issued this video saying, look, no, the government's going to tax instant payment, right? So we're going to pay taxes on instant payment, which was not part of the discussion. It was not anything like that. Huh? It's scamming, okay?
No, that is information. The guy was anticipating perfect Russian expectation.
Exactly.
We call this information.
No, he was actually saying that the government had announced that it would tax, that this was part of the discussion there, and that this would lead people that were kind of informal in the economy to be taxed as well. So it was really like trying to spread panic of something that was really a light governmental, reasonable, or just business as usual for government. This video reached 300 million people. Just 300 million views in 3 days. Okay, just like an amazing viral video. The government backed down from this decision immediately with this video, right? So it was really impressive how far this video went, and the impact it had on policy decision at that point. So this is really, and that's my point here. And you can debate, Luigi, if how fake this is, or how bad this disinformation is. What I'm saying is the use of social media by the right is so organized and it's reaching such a viral impact that is really clearing the agenda for the policy discussion. That's what's happening.
Thank you very much. I would just like to say one closing remark, and we're done, and we can all go to dinner. In times like this, marked by geopolitical turmoil and the rise of new tech oligarchy, with nearly unlimited power, many choose to keep their heads down and wait for the storm to pass. My hope is that those here today will choose differently, that we will speak up as Barry Lynn calls us to do earlier today. Because in the face of the erosion of truth and freedom, silence is not neutrality, it's complicity. Thank you very, very much, everyone.